This is the very first screenplay that I ever wrote. I wrote it back in 2009 into 2010, over 12 years ago. I'd love to say the reason that I'm looking at these scripts now is because I sold it or something like that, but I didn't. I was just cleaning my room and came across the pile and went, is this any good? And I started leafing through and was like, oh, I've got multiple iterations of this, and was enjoying just wow, I've learned a lot. And so kind of sharing some of that with you just struck me as maybe a kind of fun thing, because on this channel, it's been a lot of me critiquing other people's work. And I feel like, you need to show your shit sometimes. So this is me showing my shit. But as many lessons can be learned in watching a bad movie as there can from watching a good movie, so too is the case in reading a bad script. And I wouldn't go so far to say that this is bad, but it is not great. I certainly didn't, on my first try, write The Godfather or anything like that. Also, before diving fully into all of this, in case you wanted to see more from me that isn't necessarily a shitty first draft, my comic exists both in physical and webcomic form. It's a continuation of the animated pilot about a girl being raised by ghosts that we released a while ago. But if you wanted to see how that story is progressing, you can. If you wanted to pick up a comic, you can. If you want to, support me in that way, I'd appreciate it. But all that out of the way, let's get into these drafts. So the screenplay that I wrote was titled Red Formula. It, when first conceived, was what I described the logline being a Cold War heist, but it really is more of a madcap farce comedy. And the story revolved around the Soviets trying to steal the formula for Coca-Cola, thinking that if they could replicate it in a cheaper fashion than the United States, they could cripple the economy. Do I think that implementing that type of strategy could actually, in fact, do that? And did I do any work with an economist to prove any of that? No, absolutely not. Why that story? I don't know. The Cold War was full of the Russians and Americans doing a bunch of stupid stuff. So the Russians may be choosing to try to steal the Coca-Cola formula. It doesn't seem outside of the realm of possibility. The story revolved around an American-loving Soviet named Nikolai, who gets kind of roped in by some KGB operatives because he knows a lot about America, so he can kind of act as a sleeper agent and blend in, get in at Coca-Cola on the ground floor to try to acquire the 3 keys necessary to reach the safe where the formula is stored. And along the way, there's a love interest, the FBI is involved, a lot of how are they going to acquire all the keys? And all of this comes to a head with a shootout in the factory of Coca-Cola on the 4th of July. So it was oddly patriotic and, over the top. In retrospect, it's very strange that I was drawn to this hyper patriotic sort of imagery and symbolism, because I'm not the most patriotic or nationally driven guy. I think, in fact, that nationalism is kind of a blight, but I guess maybe this was my subconscious way of sort of pointing out how stupid it all is. So that was a very, very bad pitch of the basic beats of Red Formula. And already just saying some of it out loud and leafing through the script and sort of prep for this, I realized a few things. First rule, maybe don't open with just a wall of text. This is gross. It is originally there to establish a tone, which it, I feel, does. But the fact that, especially if I were thinking at that time I would be submitting this script and a reader would receive it, I worked as a reader doing a lot of different coverage. And if this script came in front of me, I would immediately just eyes glaze over. Not a great opener. Granted, I think the very next page, it goes to a slightly more manageable situation, and then it kind of, gets to actually looking a little bit more like a script. What's very interesting in reading through this first draft is I picked up on a lot of things that I need to be breaking myself up. The first of which is I stole from myself. I'm currently writing a sort of fantasy piece, and I almost beat for beat replicated a scene that is in this draft, but not necessarily the most recent draft of Red Formula. Like 4 drafts later, that scene was completely gone, but it was a scene in which Nikolai and his friend Alec, or brother, I forget which, they stole Coca-Cola from a like black market junkyard while in the Soviet Union, and that ultimately led them to be discovered by the KGB, and then Nikolai gets kidnapped and all of that. So that original stealing scene, which shows a level of camaraderie across him and this friend Alec, is now in a recent draft of a fantasy piece that I'm working on, which I guess that's a, hey, Michael, you need to be a little more original about things, because I just subconsciously forgot I had even written a series of scenes that are so similar. The other thing that I realized, especially in talking some of this out loud, finding 3 keys to open a safe is super video gamey as far as the plot points go. Does that make my second act incredibly easy to write? Yes, because I mean, if you're trying to just acquire 3 things, you can kind of break those beats out. And sadly, in this version and all subsequent versions, I didn't really complicate the levels of getting and acquiring the keys. They were very linear in nature. So it was, hey, the first key is occupied by this person. You need to go and do this. They went and did this. There was a little bit of fun and games, and then they moved on to the next key with a few minor setbacks, but they got the first key, and rinse, repeat. So were I to be going back in on this, I think one of the biggest things would be in that second act, making things a lot more interwoven across all of how those 3 keys got acquired. There was a little more interplay in the later drafts where keys wound up in one person's hand only to be later kicked off to another person. So there was a slight leveling up of complication, but still not great. The other thing that I definitely, just in looking through all of this, and I can even say this from some of these later drafts, is I overwrite. I overwrite a lot. I mean, just look at this. There's a lot of just like walls of dialogue, walls of description, whole scenes that I just was like, you're talking too much and nothing is accomplished here. Yeah, I wrote a note of can be condensed and funnier. Have a spy moment. You know, a thing that you'd probably want when you're revolved around the Cold War. What's also very interesting is in this first pass, I made a remark of setting up these 2 characters, Nikolai and Mary, as they'd wind up on a date. And I threw out the option of bowling, but didn't use it, where bowling is so much more interesting and, you know, it allows for some metaphor and all that sort of stuff than a sit down date, which is what I went with initially. And it's not engaging or fun. It's fine. Oh my gosh. Okay. At one point in this draft, when they are trying to seduce the heiress to the Pemberton fortune, she has one of the keys around her neck. Also, some Cubans are trying to get the formula as well, and they wind up kind of beating Nikolai to the punch in kidnapping Lois, the heiress. Then that resulted in our Russians needing to go to Cuba to regain the key. And this is how much of a California boy I am, because I wrote the Pacific Ocean. Cuba's in the Atlantic Ocean. Until this read through, I don't think I ever noticed that. Granted, I completely stripped them going to Cuba from later drafts. I just kind of shifted everything to be around the Georgia and Atlanta area. So the engagement with the Cubans, and also later in a later draft, the Chinese get involved, that was all removed. So you didn't get me just being inept. Although I'll certainly say my ineptitude shows through on my understanding of just like what the FBI and the CIA are even responsible for. But yeah, it's not a great draft. Also, in addition to having all of my notes, I have my classmates' notes on the back here from reading this particular draft, because at UCLA, we would do table reads with all the people in the screenwriting concentration. Here, I'll just read a few. My friend Ryan Finnerty, who got me my job while working at Smosh and still works there now, gave the great note of just more madcap action. This needs more madcap energy, which was something that in this first pass was very lacking. It was pretty straight-laced and dry, which is not where I wanted it to go. It needed to feel energetic and zippy, which, looking at the most recent draft that I have, I might actually go so far to say that I think I'm running too fast through some of the scenes. But another classmate, Uri, agreed with just more bang, zing. It doesn't feel like there's danger. And he also said we need to see Nikolai fucked either way. Another classmate, Rebecca, gave the notes of always no, as in no information. There needs to be self-assuredness in all the information that's being conveyed. Our friends are here, not are maybe here. Things like that. Uri also had the great note of the final shootout should happen in the factory. And I think this draft, we just had a shootout take place on the 40th executive suite floor or something like that. And while that's fine, it's so much more fun if you're in a factory while fireworks are going off on the 4th of July. Just an added level of, there's weird machines and syrups being stirred. Just a significantly more interesting location than just an office space getting shot up, which in isolation sounds very bad. But yeah, that was my shitty first draft that wasn't fully a shitty first draft because it just ends without an ending. But my full first draft came in at 95 pages. Right out the gate, there's a little more style on it where I included like a primer for the audience. The following is based off of Cold War documents, which may or may not have existed. Either way, they have since been destroyed. I also included a format note that dialogue that is written in italicized English is meant to be spoken in Hungarian and subtitled in English. Should be Russian, but okay, me. But yeah, by the time we get to this first opening, we get a nice clean 2 pages of pretty straightforward dialogue before I then hit you with a gross line of, description. But I always did view that description bit as like an opening credit sequence as you're following Coca-Cola and Tsar Cola, this made-up rival brand, and the stark contrast between lovely America and the bleak nature of the Soviet Union. The formatting is so much better. Just underlining my slug lines. It's a very simple thing, but it always immediately is like, that's where a scene starts. Oh, this also had, okay. So in this initial draft, I don't know why, but I decided that there was a larger time jump. And so Nikolai is apprehended by the KGB. And then I threw in a 3 years later, like this had a cold open of sorts, even though it's got like a cold open establishing the world that we're in, then a cold opening establishing what's going on with Nikolai, and then we're in America in Atlanta, Georgia, 3 years later in 1959. And at that point, Nikolai is just working at Coca-Cola. We skipped over all of the how and just were there. In this iteration, the person who's like in charge of this USSR coup of sorts on the formula was named Cowell. In later iterations, I called him Svedrigailov because I don't know, I liked Crime and Punishment and I thought that was a fun name, but it's such an uncommon name, it probably should be changed to just about anything else. This was also an earlier iteration where I didn't have FBI agents clearly defined and I knew that I wanted an FBI chief who was named Gradler, and he sort of operated as a J. Jonah Jameson type. But then I had this weird, like, the Ruskies are trying to hatch a plan. We need to wait for the incubating period. They're cooking something up. And it was a whole dumb exchange that started as just stockholders and then evolved into me having two kind of buffoonish FBI agents, Barris and Bloom, who got more caught up in everything. Also, from these early drafts was a character named the German, who I always envisioned being played by Derek Mears. Derek played Jason in the Friday the 13th, as well as he's just like a hulking mass of a man, but he's the nicest guy. In my head, I was like, I should write for people because obviously this is going to sell and I'll be able to cast as the writer. I don't know what I was thinking. That said, the only other character that I was writing with an actor in mind was for Nikolai. I thought that Anton Yelchin would have been great. But jumping back to the mentioning of the German, they set up this running metaphor about knowing the odds. And so Cal Svedrigailov does like a Russian roulette metaphor and spins the barrel, fires it at someone, and it's like click, click, and then he shoots the German in the chest, but the German doesn't die because why would he? So this draft was from March. Then I move into April 28th of 2010, and I have some more notes to read just that I wrote right here on the cover there. Uri makes the incredible good call that Cuba is a long and detached sequence. He loves the end scene, but he wants to get to the factory sooner and have more fun. He wanted Mary to sacrifice something, which I don't think I did. Artel wanted me to identify stakes earlier, not just for Nikolai, but also for America. So he said, make a dummy company, which is minor that we can compare it to. So that incident was bad, but if it were Coca-Cola, it would be catastrophic. He recommended Slinky, which I believe I then used in a later draft. Ryan made the recommendation that every time the USA won, Coca-Cola was there. I think we had a conversation about like various slideshows where, you know, on D-Day, there'd be Coca-Cola photoshopped into, you know, great moments in American history. And Singh made the very good note of Mary needs to be in it more, which honestly, throughout all of this, the relationship that is weakest is between our two potential lovers of Nikolai and Mary. And I don't think I ever really fully solved that problem. In this draft, I definitely went to town as far as cuts were concerned because man, oh man, look at this. I'm just noting the hell out of and rewriting like entire sections just in the margin. I will say one of my favorite things to do, and I haven't done it in a while because of the pandemic and all of that, but I used to love going to the WGA library and just leafing through scripts because sometimes you'd get like writing and these sort of markings off on the sides and getting to see early sort of drafted in notes. Yeah, but this iteration ends in the factory, and my handling of action scenes, not great. That's not a great look to have that much wide margin. It should be pretty tight and terse. So jumping from April to May, I got from 109 to 97. So I did a good job in actually trimming out all those pages that I made marks on. That said, there's a good amount of red here. Oh boy. Oh, I think at this point, this was when I started implementing, because the German never speaks, I just wrote out his lines of dialogues through looks, but then I included sort of a quote, what now? I know what you mean. Those sorts of things that, can be conveyed easily with a look. One thing that I still don't love is I made the heiress of the Coca-Cola formula, Lois, a beatnik, and feel like she is written far too, hey man, I'm a beatnik, baby. Like Lois in this might be more of a caricature than Janice in Electric Mayhem is. And one of them is a Muppet. Look at this gross block. Why did I do this? So this one's interesting because this one comes out my birthday of 2010. So this was after I graduated, but still there's a lot that's changing. Okay, I have no idea why the hell I did this. But look at that awful formatting of the top title. I don't understand at all what is happening there. There is so much that I am unhappy with in this draft. My God. Okay, there's me and my love of smash cuts happening. What's also very funny is somewhere, I believe in this draft, I made Nikolai a forger, which was like, oh, that's a good reason that he would be sought out more than just he likes America a lot. And I don't know why I was like, he speaks English with like a relatively mild accent. That makes him an acceptable spy. But yeah, as a forger, he also was like really interested in comics, which now, fast forward and they're a bunch of comics. Okay, there's an instance where I took a short line and made it a long line. Oh, but then I also cut all subsequent scenes, so maybe that's acceptable. And this scene is completely gone, and this scene is completely gone, and most of that scene. I changed the character of Worthy to O'Reilly. I changed a bunch of names like at some later iteration because I believe this was one of the last drafts that I did on Red Formula. And then I didn't touch this thing for 7 years. The craziest part is in jumping from this to the draft that I read most recently, which was from 2018. Most of the stuff in here is largely the same. Like a few things got shifted around, but the basic beats are still there. Do I think they're the best beats? No, I still think that the second act really needs work. I think that the first act largely is fairly strong. I think the third act is at least ends in a fairly strong place with a few complications that are good. But the weakest thing about the script is just definitely that both Nikolai and Mary are the most boring characters, and they're the ones that we're supposed to be rooting for in a lot of ways. So with all of that said, what do I do from here? Well, I do think that the story is kind of fun, and I can't think of any Cold War farce that involves the Coca-Cola formula, so I'm inclined to say maybe the idea is even original. I would like to rewrite this in some capacity. However, I am currently focused on a few different things. Since doing this, I have only written a few other features, and my primary focus has been on Obituary, both as a animated show, but also as a web comic, and also like now a printed comic, and just television writing in general. So I've written a fair amount of pilots and specs over the years. With all that said, I've spoken very broadly about the script, obviously, and if this even sounds remotely interesting to you, I've included a link to both the first draft and the most recent draft. So if you are looking to fill a Friday night, boy howdy, you can look at my shitty first draft and where things have, transmutated to. If you want to be extra cool and helpful, I'll also throw in a Google form of just like, hey, what are your notes? And you can write me your notes. In no way is this a homework assignment, but I am always welcome to feedback, and I know for a fact that this script is not in the best shape it could be. So read or don't. I think though it's healthy to look back on the stuff you've written and be both critical but recognize that you are growing and improving. Every single draft you write, you can get a better understanding of why you did what you did, and how you can hopefully learn and grow from looking at, multiple iterations of the same thing. I'm sure that there are many people who are subscribed to Belated Media who they themselves want to be writers or are writers. And I would encourage all of you to think about that story that you have in a drawer or you've just got an outline for, and encourage you to maybe lend your own fresh eyes back to that project, because who knows, maybe with some time passed, you'll have a new take on what you started with. And it's always very fun, I think, to be looking at a project that you've forgotten some things about and go, oh, I wrote that, and be impressed by yourself, or, oh, I wrote that, and be able to kill your darlings with reckless abandon. Both are great points for growth. And I think that's all I have to say about that. So if this were of any interest to any of you, again, links in the description down below. Also, you can pick up my comic if you want to support me in that way. And also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, because I am announcing the various conventions that me and my sister are going to show off the comic. That and, these stickers that we have of that. That's a fun thing. So comment, click, and keep loving movies, guys. As for me, I'm just going to think about what I've done, because I might have opened the floodgates to a lot. To a lot. But hoo boy.